right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Ageless Movement Podcast. Today, well, first of all, we should introduce ourselves if this is the first time you're checking us out. My name's Scott Lohman. I'm an adaptive PE instructor and a personal trainer, among a few other things.
My name is Sang Kwang Nak, and I do mostly personal training and a handful of group instructed classes.
And she's awesome. Okay, please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. It really helps us build the channel, and we love giving you all this content that you could definitely utilize in your own life. All right, so today's a really interesting topic. It's a little touchy with some people because no one likes to be thought of as somebody with bad posture. Today is posture. But before we start talking about posture and all the things that afflict posture, why don't we just all agree that nobody has perfect posture?
Correct.
And there are things in our lives that we do that sometimes adversely affect posture. Like, I remember a time when I was playing football and the receiver went up to catch the ball, and I, like a good defensive back, pulled those elbows back, created the incompletion. But I have a tendency to overdo things. If anybody knows me, knows that about me. I couldn't just let go of the guy. You know, I had to slam him on the turf because let him know he shouldn't catch a ball anywhere near me. And you know what I ended up doing? I threw him on top of me. And I've permanently changed the structure of my shoulders because of that. Right here you can see my collarbone isn't like the one on the right. And that's thanks to my decision there to slam the receiver on the turf, and I ended up slamming him on me. It was really weird. I thought I hurt my ribs until I got in the mirror after the game, and I looked and I saw something sticking out of my, I saw my collarbone sticking out, and I thought, oh man, did myself in. Anyway, enough about me. Let's talk about posture.
Although that's not an uncommon story because
Yeah.
Earlier this year, Scott worked with an osteopath from Dallas, and it was hilarious because somewhere through the session, I mentioned the whole collarbone thing, and he asked Scott's story, and he's like, yeah, I have one too. So, I don't know, something about football and clavicles or something.
Yes, so the take-home message today, football doesn't always mean a healthy clavicle.
But for your everyday person, I come across this a lot. When you have a car accident, sometimes things shift in your spine, and then that starts to have a small change in posture, and then depending on how many more times you end up having an accident or a fall, things start going down in that direction. So it becomes affected easily and quickly. So that's why we always try to address it from the beginning with the people we work with. And I think for a lot of people, they feel like it's a hurdle that they're never going to get over, but it's just one of those things that I think you work on every day. And when, you try to do your best alignment, and then over time it gets better.
So basically what you're saying is, if you do have, say, a situation where it's very obvious that your posture is not very good, one of the more common things I see in my life is the protruding neck. Mm-hmm. So the cervical area is really tilted forward. Mm-hmm. And when I always tell people, especially I've worked with clients with necks like that, I tell them, you know what? A little bit over time. Mm-hmm. If you can just improve even marginally over a period of 5 years, that is going to result in a healthier spine, especially healthier cervical area. Because the better you can stack the vertebrae, the lower your chance you're going to have of stenosis or losing fluid in the vertebrae and having a herniated disc, bulging disc, all that stuff. That's how I look at it.
Yeah. And then for me, I just view it, if you want to try to mitigate, even mitigate's not even the word, but for somebody like me who's concerned about what osteoporosis is going to look like for me in the long run, posture plays an important role because basically the vertebral column of your spine houses what we call trabecular bone, and that's what helps build up our bones. So it's those sites that help build it, and so I don't want to lose too many of those bones. I mean, they exist all over, but that's probably where the abundance is going to be along your spine. The other big one is the top of your leg bones, and the femur is the other big one. So like those two areas are areas that I'm always concerned about being mobile and keeping it healthy and safe. So I'm trying to think. There was another thing and I just forgot what it was.
Sometimes that happens. Happens to me a lot.
Oh, and breathing.
Breathing, right?
Right. So breathing, if your posture isn't good, it's hard to take in air and then basically breathe all the way down into your pelvic floor if you're rounded already. So, I mean, like, I think you've probably seen that happen more than I have. But.
You know, that is correct. And I have to say, you know, we don't want to talk for 2 hours here today,
No.
but there's a lot to unpack with posture and spine. And I gotta honestly say, one of the things I've experienced in my life is more than one shoulder impingement. And, you know, having bad posture is going to adversely affect even the way your shoulders work. So if you don't have good thoracic mobility or your thoracic vertebrae isn't lined up properly, you're going to have a harder time controlling your shoulder blades. If you don't control your shoulder blades, those muscles that control the shoulder blades get weaker, and you're just much more susceptible to injuring yourself, lifting heavier weight, or even getting up off the ground, or doing any kind of sport you enjoy. Water sports, whatever, swimming. Swimming really will have issues that way if you're having trouble keeping your shoulder blades down because your thoracic, you know, area isn't lined up properly. There's a lot of issues there, and what we want to talk about today is what we can do to improve in each section of the vertebrae. Maybe just talk about the things that do affect posture from head to toe.
Okay.
All right.
So that where we're starting?
That's where we're starting, head to toe. So maybe we should describe first, what is the difference between all the vertebrae? I mean, a lot of people don't even know the cervical from the thoracic, from the lumbar, unless you've had damage to your spine, and you probably know all about it. I'm going to screw off this a little bit. There we go.
So we don't have our little friend back in Redwood City.
Who's our little? Oh yes, Karen Carpenter. Yes.
But what Scott was saying about shoulders and so forth. The other thing about shoulders or shoulder blades is that the rib cage has to be a certain shape for the shoulder blade to move properly. So if you're stuck because your ribs and your spine are rounded, it makes it hard for your shoulder blades to move freely. So that's the other reason my posture is really important.
And ribs play a role in posture. That's a good point you brought up, saying, because we're talking about the vertebrae, but you also have ribs.
Yeah, that clavicle.
Yes, I know
that
about
clavicle plays a big part in shoulder.
Sure does. And we got floating ribs too.
Okay.
As you can see, everything affects everything else. The position of your hip, its relation to the knee, to the ankle. If any of this is out of alignment, something's going to wear out prematurely, or if you're lucky, you'll strain some muscles before the joint's damage, and that'll be your warning sign that you need to change something.
Yeah, like, I mean, and the reason why we are addressing posture, it's probably the number one thing with most of the people that we work with. For me, most of the people who work with me usually come in because they have some sort of pain, and it can usually be addressed with posture. So then back to our spine here. So Scott mentioned, so you have your cervical spine up over where your neck is, then thoracic, which is basically shoulder blades.
Middle spine,
shoulder blade, yeah. And this one, this is what a lot of my clients deal with, because a lot of them are rounded. Some of them are rounded from working at the computer. Others are just rounded from sitting in their jobs. And then we have the lumbar curve, which is the low back.
And that seems to be where the majority of Americans, not just Americans, but I guess people in the world, have problems with their spine. I've known several people that have had herniated disc, and oftentimes it is in the lumbar, the larger vertebrae, but it's also in the cervical as well. But I've probably seen more lumbar issues than I've personally seen thoracic issues or cervical.
I've worked with golfers, so it exists throughout the spine.
Yeah. Well, my buddy Dave has, 8 different vertebrae that he has stenosis in?
Yeah.
And basically he's affected everywhere from cervical to thoracic and lumbar. And that just means stenosis, things are closing in and the nerves get impinged and then you get tingling and weird sensations on your limbs.
But he's a good example of accidents, lifting heavy.
Things the wrong way.
Yeah. So that his case is a little, I think, more extreme than most people that we come across.
And so, my buddy Dave's a Corvette mechanic. He's a famous amateur club racer that's won just about every race he's ever been in. And he's kind of a crazy guy. And with him and his business, performance fabrication, working on cars, for him, haste is everything. He wants to get things done, right? And sometimes he would move things with improper form. I recall one time he said he had a car on a lift and he was trying to do an alignment on it or something. And I don't know, the lift didn't work properly. And he kind of braced the part of the car with his head, right? And you could just imagine what that does to vertebrae. And people do these stupid things all the time. I had another friend of mine one time saw me working out at Powerhouse Gym, literally walked in the middle of it to introduce me to his date. I turned around to get some water and he's picking up the weight I'm lifting. And it's not like,
warmed up too.
yeah, that I've warmed up to lift. And, he lifted it with his lower back and I'm like, oh my God. See, this is why people have problems with their vertebrae, and then that and uncontrollable, unforeseen things like car accidents, falls. Not that I know about those.
Well, talk about falls. The other thing also, when your spine is misaligned, it's harder to balance. So, I mean, that's something that a lot of older adults, that's their number one thing that they're concerned about. So that's why I personally, I just tell them, it's so much easier to work on your posture every day than it is to just go out there and see, how many different ways can I balance? Because if you go to the root of the problem, then the balancing thing is super easy. But if you're not willing to address posture, then it's a long road.
Yeah, and so I don't want to misconstrue things with what we're doing in our podcast here today. Some people have something called structural scoliosis, and others have functional scoliosis. And I'm just going to tell you a very brief story how we screen for this. So this started, I believe, in the late 60s. They started screening for this. What they would have you do, and it's a little bit weird, but when you're in PE, the PE teachers taught to do this. The students stand in front of you. They literally bend over like that. And what you're looking at is actually, it's hard to describe here without showing. The level of the back.
Yeah.
So you're seeing the person bent over in front of you, and if one side of their back is higher than the other, then we know that's structural scoliosis. However, if it's even and there is scoliosis, that would be functional. That would be the result of how the individual moves versus the structure of their spine and everything else that affects the spine. You got to remember, everything affects the spine, ribs too. So we're not really going to address much on scoliosis today because that's not really appropriate for a podcast. This is just for the population as a whole. And look, if you do have scoliosis out there, don't freak out because there are mild versions of scoliosis and there are severe versions of scoliosis. In minor cases, it's hardly noticeable. Maybe you see a little bit of posture differences that you can mostly be corrected with exercise. And then of course you have severe cases where organs are impinged. But people like that, definitely it was known at birth and they've been treated their whole life. And they have surgeries for that.
And then with the functional, I don't have the picture up, but even with functional, working on trying to find your center of balance, and especially through your feet, you can fix that. It's just, it takes working with an individual who knows how to make that happen. But somewhere I have a picture of Scott, because we see it a lot on him, where he's not quite straight, and I have seen people fix him in less than an hour.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Sometimes I can fix myself if I roll my feet out, if I stretch properly. I like to do this particular type of stretching called Eldoa, which it's basically stretching your muscles and also contracting your muscles in a way to create space in the vertebrae, what we call facet space. So after I do my Eldoa, and basically I get my legs against the wall, I try to get my sits bone touching the wall and my torso on the floor where everything's perfectly flat, and I'm externally rotating in each shoulder and hand, and then extending overhead, stretching, and I do that for about 2 sets of 1 minute, and that alone could put my posture back in the right place. And I do it every day to protect my spine.
So it's basically spine decompression, which is why he's on the floor, so there is no load on his spine. But also, he's working on lengthening to create that facet space that he's talked about. So working on that structural part, that on the muscle part, it's not actually the structural.
Correct. And the other thing is, you have to remember, in life, most of what we do in life causes compression. What we're trying to do is decompress. So even a lot of the strength training we do, not all of it of course, but quite a bit of it does cause compression. But if you're doing pull-ups, that's going to actually lengthen and create some decompression. And that's why it's good to do pull-ups, or even lat pulls if you can't do a pull-up.
Or even just to hang.
Or just hanging, yeah. And you don't have to be able to support your whole body weight. You could step on a big thick band, or you can just grab and bend your knees a little and just
lower the bar.
Yeah, whatever you can handle. It's pretty amazing. And then nowadays in gyms, they even have these counterweight pull-up devices that are really neat. I remember what that came from originally. The Gravitron. I'm showing my age.
Is that
the Gravitron was the first thing I remember that, although it was fully automated, so you would stand on it and you would select how much counterweight you want. So let's say, for instance, I weigh 200 pounds and I can't do a pull-up.
Oh,
I can, but let's hypothetically say I can't. What I could do is say, make myself weigh 40 pounds less, and that allows me to pull myself up. But the neat thing is you could really focus on your form, you can keep yourself nice and straight, and you can get some decompression. It's pretty ingenious, actually. It was very 80s, like the way they advertised it, the Gravitron.
When you said Gravitron, I was thinking of inversion.
Inversion tables are, yeah. That's even better, probably.
So earlier this year, I took a course with Dr. Ed Thomas, and that's his big thing is being inverted. It was fine until I went and read the contraindications and realized that I shouldn't be on one. And I think a lot of people actually won't be able to be on one because of the long list. And I think like having some sort of back problem is one. So how many of us can actually say that we don't have a back problem?
Right, and most people do have some minor form of back trouble, yeah.
And then the reason why I can't get on it is because of my eye. So.
Oh yes, detached retina.
Detached retina. So here I thought I was fine to get onto one of these tables. I was so excited I was going to buy one, and then when I went back and read it for the third or fourth time, I realized, oh wait a second,
it's not appropriate for me.
Yeah, so I got to find a different way.
And you detached your retina when you tackled Earl Campbell that one time?
More like mini Earl Campbell tackled me.
Oh, my poor baby. That's before she met me. I wouldn't allow that to happen.
That's what happens on playgrounds.
Yes, when you're a child. Fun times. Okay, so maybe we should get into the bones of things more.
Okay.
Metaphorically speaking.
Yeah,
and we should talk about perhaps, okay. So basically the cervical vertebrae, they tend to be smaller. They tend to have a little more range of motion. Thoracic, is larger yet, maybe not quite as mobile as cervical, but you have to get thicker as you go further down the spine because you have larger muscles and your body needs to move things, to handle loads. And then of course the lumbar has the least amount of range of motion and the largest vertebrae, okay? Okay, so what affects these things? Where should we start from?
Everything with me has to do with how you interact with the ground.
Oh, feet, yes. I get scolded all the time for my feet. And she likes to show off to me. She literally can make her toes do this. She goes, splay, splay. She does it with both of them. It's crazy. And then one time she grabbed a pen. I was trying to write a check and she's taking it away from me. It's really crazy. I wish I had that kind of skill with my toes.
We're working on it.
We are working on it.
We are always working to get better.
Okay, so what do you mean when you say relationship with the ground? Like, what's going on with a lot of people? Are they not using their whole foot when they walk or when they're lifting something off the ground?
So, well, one thing here, when we talk about feet, I find that a lot of people I work with actually refuse to get out of their super comfy shoes.
Yes, I see a lot of that. It's like really built up.
Yeah, so those built up shoes is that there's just a lot of sensory dampening that's happening. And I mean, I have clients who literally will not get it. They're like, no, these are the best things ever. And I ask them, well, do you feel this and that? And it's like, no. And I understand, I'm like, I get that because your interaction with the ground, and it's dampened by the amount of cushioning that's in the shoe. So, but that's a personal thing. At the same time, I wouldn't necessarily recommend people go to these super minimalist shoes right out the gate because it takes training. It took me like 10 years to get into doing, using minimalist shoes 100% of the time. So
I have you to thank for that. Because here's the thing, I was the classic person who walked around on really thick supportive shoes, and I wasn't even a runner, like a distance runner. And I remember way back in my 20s, in my mid-20s, I played a pickup football game in some Kmart tennis shoes. Never do that. Not that there's really any Kmarts left. But either way, Walmart. Anyway, don't use bad shoes when you play pickup football. And I'll tell you, I ended up with a strained Achilles tendon, and it turned into Achilles tendonitis. And I kid you not, it lasted me 6 years. And you're probably wondering, like, why would it last 6 years? I'll tell you why it lasted 6 years. It was 1994. And in 1994, we just didn't do soft tissue work. And it makes me really respect Jerry Rice. How did that man play 18 or 19 years of football? Most of that 18 or 19 years was in the 80s and the 90s when nobody was doing soft tissue until towards the end of the 90s. And I know a lot of people that had to retire from the NFL early because of things like that, either plantar fasciitis or Achilles tendonitis, because they just couldn't move explosively anymore. So what I would do is, and of course this was very archaic at the time, I took an ice cube, I put it in my sock, and I'd massage my Achilles. Every night I would do that. I did that for 6 years. And then finally, by God's grace, I get home one night and I'm like, I forgot to put ice in my sock. What am I doing? My Achilles. And all of a sudden I was like, oh my goodness, my Achilles feels better. Okay, it healed over time. Now, if I use the techniques that I use now, such as rolling my feet out on a lacrosse ball, properly stretching my Achilles, doing all these specific targeted Eldoa stretches, I should call them, I could have gotten over this in 6 months. No more than a year, trust me. Because there were a few times it flared up again, and it never was more than a 2-week rehab for me. Why? Because I do soft tissue work. That's why I always tell my clients, all my people, roll it out. Work your fascia.
So Scott loves to roll his body, and he mentioned the lacrosse ball. Personally, I'm a big proponent of yoga tune-up balls just because of the pliability. A lot of people might find that the lacrosse ball is a little too intense and there's no give. And that's actually one of the other reasons why flooring isn't so, it's harsh on the body. I mean, even just looking at our laminate floors and stone, there's no reverberation that happens. And then we go out to the concrete. I mean, I myself, like being on a treadmill, I don't do very well on it. So
yes, me too. I
yeah.
can second that.
So surfaces are really important, but yet all of our surfaces have been like made perfect for us to make sure that we don't trip and it, you know, aesthetically looks good. So you know, just be careful about what type of ball you use, and then also if you're going to walk around barefoot, how much of that time is spent on the floor that's maybe not conducive.
What about carpets?
Carpets, I mean, well, they're padded, so it's the same as wearing your
Okay.
your
Give me not
shoe.
carpets. But it's still better to walk around in
It's
carpets without
textured at
shoes
least.
on versus keeping shoes on all the time, like
Yeah.
I did for so many years.
And actually, so the other thing when Scott mentioned the shoe is that you can't go through full range through your foot of all the bones when you walk, which is the reason I think, based on his story, sounds like why he had Achilles tendon issues, is because you need to go through basically the full cycle and push off with your big toe in order to pull the Achilles tendon and the calf, which then goes straight up to your glute. So like that whole mechanism, if it's working, then you don't have these types of issues, but they get stopped or dampened by these types of shoes or by the shuffle walk. So then, you know, you don't really pull on basically all the muscles that need to be working in order to keep everything healthy.
So that's a good point. I can definitely say that my posterior chain, and when I say posterior chain, I mean butt muscles, hamstrings, have never been as strong as they've been in recent years. Thanks to you convincing me to start working towards minimalist shoes, and also when I'm doing deadlifts, doing it without shoes on. I mean, that was like a game changer for me. I really have not had the issues with the Achilles, even with the, okay, sometimes the bottom of my foot, imagine this being my big toe, it's called the flexor hallucis, that gets tight, but it's nothing that about a couple minutes on a lacrosse ball, rolling it, can't take care of. And I feel a lot healthier as a result of it. And the thing that I want to stress to everyone out there, and I know you're explaining this to everyone, but I'm just going to add my 2 cents. If you are not pushing off the heel, you're not using your glutes. And this is why people wear their knees out, because they spend almost all their life on the balls of their feet. Their heels make very little contact on the ground. Going upstairs, same thing. The knees are way over the toes. You're putting all the weight on the balls of your feet constantly, and the knee will wear out. It will happen in time. Whether you're aware of it or not, it will. And in my fortunate case, I had a tendon, a major important tendon in the knee we talked about a few weeks ago, the patellar tendon. I was always prone to patellar tendonitis, and I couldn't figure out why. You know, it was very difficult to keep it from inflaming. You know, I had to work really hard to keep it from getting to the point where it was in pain. Icing and just making sure I'm not overdoing things in the gym. And then this beautiful lady right here showed me how to really use my feet, especially on certain movements like a deadlift or a squat where I'm pushing through the heels as well. And I gotta honestly say, getting my posterior chain stronger, it was not as strong as I thought it was more than 5 or 6 years ago. And now I don't suffer from patellar tendonitis, other than that little incident when I blew my knee out. But that's a whole different thing. That was just pure stupidity.
So like for me, when I go up the stairs, I try to think of that heel placement and going up the stairs by pushing through that heel. And then when I come down, I try to think of like the ball of my foot creates this nice lever to bring myself down. So like I'm not just kind of slapping, you know, my body as I go down the stairs. I see a lot of people, they just kind of jump down.
Yeah.
I work on trying to create a connection between the big toe and the pinky toe on the ground as I go down in that way. And I also try not to roll through my ankle to go down every time either. So that's how I those are my exercises.
That's really good, and that's something you could do for yourselves. For those of you that live either in an apartment where you have a lot of stairs, or you have a house with a second level like we do, practice when you're going up the stairs. Use the whole length of the step, push off your heel, make sure your knee doesn't go flying over your toes, make sure it stays over ankle, and try to feel your butt and hamstrings work as you extend the hip with each step. And that's a great exercise you could do every day, every time you're just going up and down the stairs.
Yeah, for the most part, that's how I go up and down the stairs. And then the other thing, I think with handrails, a lot of people use it to pull themselves rather than strengthen everything in the posterior chain.
So that's the thing. If you move cautiously, you don't really have to pull on that railing. It's just there in case you need it. But to be honest, how I stacked on the stairs, it wasn't because I didn't have my hand on the rail. I just didn't even know the stairs were there, and I sprinted down the stairs. Not advisable. Okay, let's move on now to, say, the butt muscles and the hamstrings and how they affect spine. Because maybe you're functioning pretty well here, but in most cases, you're probably not functioning well in your feet if you're having weakness in the butt and the hamstrings. But let's just explain to everyone the importance the butt and hamstrings play with that. And maybe a few exercises they can do to improve the strength in those areas.
Well, I would say for glutes is number one, that there's awareness. A lot of people I work with we're constantly having the conversation if they feel their glutes. If it's questionable, then I advise trying to find a way, because nowadays people, we've had people diagnosed with random glute conditions.
Correct, yeah.
Which is interesting that they got diagnosed with that in the first place, because I didn't think they did that many, but you've come across quite a few people.
I have.
Yeah, and even for myself, like for a while on my right side, you could ask me all you want if I felt that glute, and I'm like, I don't feel that one, but I feel the left one. It was because of posture that caused me to not feel the right side so much. It's taken some time, but now I feel it. But that's because I'm always setting my feet and making sure that I distribute weight on both legs. I think a lot of people like to be dependent on just that one leg and the other one's just extra. The problem is when you no longer have use of your good leg, that backup leg might not be there for you.
Yeah, true.
So it's good to just balance on both, work out both, be strong in both. Right-left symmetry I don't have, but I still have to make sure that they both work. So.
Correct, and that's the thing, because you know how I tell people don't have good glutes? I always ask them to squat for me. If it's a young enough or healthy enough, not necessarily young, but a healthy enough functioning individual that I may be working with as a student, as a client, I always ask them, show me your squat. First thing I ask them, do they have knee issues or hip issues? And if they tell me no, I say, well, I'd like to see your squat. And I always tell them, just naturally squat. Don't try to impress me. And that's when I see the problems. If they squat just in their knees, in other words, when they do their squat, if the only thing that's bending is the knees, then I know they don't use their hips. But if they do squat and their butt sticks back, then you know they have pretty good hips. And I always make jokes with my old ladies in class. I always tell them, and this makes them laugh, I say, imagine a stripper on a stripper pole, right? Because the vision of that is when you hang onto a stripper pole, the butt's back, and always the butt is far enough back so the knees are over the ankles. And I always say, you know why strippers never have bad knees? Because they're really good at using their hips. It always makes people laugh, right? But it's true.
I take people to the wall. I have them measure out.
Okay, I like to make them laugh a little.
And basically, I have them reach their glutes towards the wall so that they can feel their hamstrings and their glutes. So,
that's another way to do it.
Yeah, that's usually my beginner hinge
exercise. And it's fascinating to me because I go to gyms all the time to work out, of course not lately. And I see these trainers, especially some of these younger trainers, and they're working with younger clients. and they don't really teach them how to squat properly. Hell, they don't even teach them how to deadlift or hinge. And then they put a bar on their back and they have them squat. Now, I'm not going to mention any names, but one guy in particular, I'll never forget this. I was at Powerhouse Gym, not mentioning any names. There was a trainer there. He was a young guy, and from what I heard was he was a former professional baseball player for the Giants. And he had this younger, blondish chick, and I'm looking at her, and she already was kind of knock me when she do things. Yes, you know where I'm going with this. And I'm thinking, whatever you do, bro. Now, this is all mentally, these conversations I have with myself in between sets. And I'm thinking, please do not put a bar on that woman's neck and have her squat. I mean, on her shoulders and have her squat. And what did he do? Put a bar on her shoulders and have her squat. And I'm watching, and she's squatting down, and literally the knees are going towards each other like this. The right one worse than the left. And I'm just like, it takes everything in me to not intervene there, but I'm not going to do it because A, I don't work there, and B, he's a fellow trainer. I don't want to embarrass him in front of his client. But it's hard, because he's hurting that client. Well, I didn't have to, fortunately. A very famous trainer at Powerhouse who now owns his own gym stepped in and said, bro, what are you doing? And I'm like, thank God. And what he did was he intervened, he worked with her and this is on his own time. He showed her how to squat with body weight first, so the knees are stable, the hips are stable, and then everything's lined up right, and you don't see those knees knocking together under load. That's what the trainer should have done in the first place, and he didn't do it. And that's why it's good to not be an absolute, what do they call that? Absolutist thinking, thank you. If you're an absolutist, like, you must do it this way, and that's it. That type of thinking is not good in fitness and movement because what works for one person may not work for somebody else. All right?
That actually is a podcast in the future.
Yes!
Scott
See, I come
was
up with
asking
stuff.
me for topics, and this was actually because on Friday night
Yeah.
I was watching something, and it was really interesting. We'll talk about it some other time, but it does play onto that story. Every trainer I think has their own methodology and also their own hierarchy of what they think should happen. So it's good that if you work with somebody, that you are in alignment, because if you're not, then it will get real interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so and the reason why it's so important to have your glutes and hamstrings working, it's good for your posture. It helps keep your lumbar in proper alignment. And it helps all the way up the chain, even to your upper neck. Also, it'll prevent knee pain. It'll prevent back pain. The other thing too is, as we move higher up the chain, we have the thoracic area, which is right up here. And that's where being able to move your shoulder blades is very important, but not just moving your shoulder blades, but keeping your shoulders depressed. All those muscles like that anterior serratus, which is right here. And the interesting thing about here, what else is here? My ribs. Yeah, exactly, my ribs are here. So ribs are part of this too. And you can actually help your structure by taking care of the muscle around it. So you're not just relying on the bone structure, on the rib structure to stabilize your body, but also the muscle structure to get you moving in the proper direction. And, things you can do to make your glutes and hamstrings stronger. You can start very basic with a pelvic bridge where you squeeze your glutes, you lift your hips up off the ground, making sure your feet are flat. Then you can alternate legs, you can do a single leg bridge. Then when you're a little more advanced, you can try a deadlift. And I always like to start with kettlebells because they're safest to lift. You can put them between the ankles and learn how to properly pull the weight up off the ground, whereas with a bar, it's out in front of you. It's not always the most ergonomical thing to teach a novice. And also, to get the shoulder blades working better, you can just have people, and you can do this on so many different levels. You can take a TheraBand, wrap it around the armpits, and have them work, protract, retract, just like that. Squeezing the shoulder blades in, pushing the shoulders forward. Like you're shoving somebody and pushing them over. Or you can get in the push-up position and keep your arms straight and just try moving your shoulder blades. Try to push till the shoulders round. Try to squeeze the shoulder blades together till they retract. And that's essentially what a push-up is. At the very end of the push-up, your shoulders round because you're pushing all the way out. When you lower yourself down, you squeeze your shoulder blades in, keep the elbows in, lower yourself down. And having those shoulder blades retracting properly and staying depressed, keeping the humerus down, helps protect your rotator cuff muscles. Because when that humerus is too high up in the glenoid fossa, it's gonna bang your rotator cuff. I mean, you think about it, all that stuff for shoulder stability is right back here in the thoracic lower cervical area. So, now they know how to take care of their spine.
Yes.
Take care of your feet, make sure your hips are stable and mobile.
And while we're here, the other reason why this is so important is it's the base of the spine, so it would be well supported if this works. So that's the other reason why I'm always asking about people's glutes.
You know, it's like a house, right? The second story is not going to be structurally sound if the first story isn't, right? Correct. That's the foundation. And same thing with the cervical area. When you see necks that don't look like they're in proper alignment, you oftentimes see rounded shoulders. And not just rounded shoulders. I want all of you to touch this area of your shoulder next to your neck. That's called your trapezius. And what you do there is you can elevate shoulders, and then you can depress shoulders, and you'll feel a stretch there. Now, those muscles don't depress. Those muscles, the upper traps, elevate. Now, oftentimes what happens with people that have bad neck posture and bad shoulder strength, they almost go hand in hand, is you'll see those trap muscles will really build up on some people. And yet, their deltoid will be very small. So you see these weird sloping looking shoulders that are not only rounded, but they have this kind of shape to them. And that's most likely the result, obviously, of not having good strength in the middle traps and in that serratus, because the serratus keeps the shoulders depressed. And that helps with the neck as well, because you keep all that muscle there stable, it helps support the structure. But when that muscle becomes really weak, especially here, and the only part of the traps you're working is out here, and you're just elevating all the time, even when you're lifting something up with your arm and you're having to use those traps to do it, you're going to have overworked, painful traps and bad neck posture.
So what's your middle trap exercise?
The middle trap exercise that I absolutely love is the face pull.
Right. So this is why gyms are important.
Yeah.
They're hard to find machines, or I mean, like I train a client via Zoom, and there is no setup for. Basically, it has to be a high anchor and it's a pull down. So.
But one can do it with a TheraBand.
Yeah, I mean that's how we do it.
And if you have a banister, you can wrap it around the banister. I always tell people, grab it this way. Don't grab it that way, grab it that way. You know, like your grip and you're throwing a seat, same thing. Grab it there, pull, squeeze the shoulder blades in, drive the elbows back. That is how you train the middle trapezius and the rhomboids, because what that does is, all that does is it allows you to retract your shoulder blades under load. And that is extremely important when you're doing a push-up or a pull-up or any of these body weight, these essential body weight exercises. And it helps. If you're doing a heavy bench press, if you can't retract your shoulder blades, you're gonna wreck your shoulder, guaranteed. All right.
Okay, so we hit thoracic. So one last thing, all the way up here, cervical. One thing that early when I was starting, I used to work out in the park with Dan John, and his thing was you got to work towards only sleeping with one pillow. And that's the reason why, is to try to get as close to this alignment as possible. The more pillows you have, that means your head's more forward. So
I can proudly say for a lot of years of my life, I slept with no pillow.
Then we got a fancy pillow.
Yeah, and then she got me a fancy Italian pillow with some kind of liquid gel. You could roll it up like a blunt, take it out of put it in your suitcase, take it out, and it goes back to its original form. I just love Italians, man. They really know how to exquisitely design things. Of course, it was like a $300 pillow, right? That's very Italian as well.
But it is super nice.
But it is nice. It's like being in a Ferrari, right? It's not for everyone, but man, it's nice to get in.
So yeah, just remember, if you do sleep with multiple pillows, try to work. Well, first you're basically trying to get your ears more in line with your shoulders. I think is probably the easiest way to think of it. So, but that can be affected or caused by having all those pillows.
Definitely. All right, anything else you want to add, say?
No, I think that's it. We covered shoes.
Yeah, we covered quite a bit in this podcast, and let us know in the comments if there's anything, of course, questions, but also if you have a suggestion about a particular topic you want us to cover, you can leave a comment on that, or maybe it's a particular part of this talk today, because we can talk a long time on this, but podcasts aren't supposed to be really long, unless you're Joe Rogan and you have big stars on. But in our case, we like to keep them to half an hour if we can. Hopefully that was today. Anyway, anything else?
Okay.
All right, everyone, I hope you had a wonderful Sunday. The smoke is getting a lot better in California.
Yeah.
We're getting control of these fires. Fingers crossed. All right, don't forget to like and subscribe. Please leave a comment, and we'll see you soon.